Yesterday, the White House threw a pep rally to celebrate the Inflation Reduction Act, better known as their latest $700 billion spending spree. One minor problem, it was the same day that the Consumer Price Index showed that prices for all items continued to creep up for Americans, logging an increase of 8.3% over last year. To make matters worse, the stock market took its worst beating in more than 2 years when the COVID first became a pandemic. Republicans on the Hill are concerned that higher prices are here to stay. Can anything be done to provide relief to the average working American family? Joining me now to discuss this and more is Congressman Kevin Brady. He's the ranking member on the House Ways and Means Committee. He represents the 8th District of the Lone Star State. Congressman Brady, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Good to see you, Tony. Thanks for having me.
So let me just ask this, how tone deaf is the White House? They celebrated this Inflation Reduction Act on the very day that inflation numbers were released, showing that there was an increase, and of course the stock market taking its worst beating in 2 years.
Yeah, Tony, can you imagine this while a lot of families are skipping meals and delaying their retirement because of Joe Biden's cruel economy, mainly inflation? The White House and the president are celebrating, partying at the White House over their bill that won't cut inflation. Many people believe it'll drive it even higher. So, look, I think consumers took a couple big hits yesterday and today. Obviously, prices are continuing to go up, especially with food, which is now, I think, at a 48 or 49-year high. And that's really crushing people. Core inflation is way higher than the economists expected. And this morning, we found out that inflation for businesses that always end up later in higher prices is at 8.7%, another huge number. So there's no question consumers, higher prices are here to stay. I don't care what the president says. We're in this problem because of that spending, and Democrats continue to do it, as you said, in this new $700 billion spending spree. So look, I know the president's trying to spin big victories, but back home with working families, they're just getting kicked in the gut.
So, Congressman, let me ask you this question. You made reference to this, the core rate of consumer inflation. That's a look at prices where we take out the most volatile, like fuel and such. That actually climbed from 5.9% to 6.3% in terms of increase. So that's quite significant. That's the number that a lot of people are looking at. Does that give us any indication of how entrenched inflation is in the U.S. economy?
It does. And you're right for pointing out what core inflation may not mean a lot when people hear it, but it really is. Without food and energy, sort of cuts to what's the real problem here. And that went up far higher and faster than economists projected. That's what drove the stock market down, but that's what I think drove back to everyone's knowledge now that all this spin on inflation has peaked. It's temporary. It's going down now. It's just not the case. And I think, Tony, going forward, you're starting to see how expensive, homes have been, how apartments have been, housing and all that. I think it's finally starting to show up in the consumer price index. That's going to drive higher prices for another year or so. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see higher energy prices going forward as well, especially as we enter the winter months.
So there are predictions that the Federal Reserve, when they meet next week, will raise the prime interest rate a full percentage point. And before it's all over, we could see the prime rate as high as 4.75%. What impact will that have on the federal government that has to pay, really pay the interest on the growing debt that we have?
Yeah, so there's no question about it. The interest rates, from the Federal Reserve have been so low, almost zero for so long, that I think it's artificially propped up the economy. Certainly lulled lawmakers into thinking the costs of these big deficits aren't big. But now you're going to see the true costs of those, and they are going to be staggering. How much of our federal budget goes to paying the debt because the interest rates are finally returning normal? But that's not the only pain. Certainly borrowing costs across the board for families and businesses are going to be painful. When you're in a recession or on the verge of a recession, because of inflation, the Federal Reserve is going to create a lot of pain to try to solve President Biden's problems here. And I really worry what that pain is going to be. The answer is to stop the additional spending, get workers back to work. That's going to help in inflation. But also, I think we need frankly, some tax incentives to be able to allow businesses, not tax hikes under Joe Biden, but tax relief focused on the supply chain, empty shelves, driving down inflation.
Well, you talk about the spending, and that brings me to another question I want to ask. The Fed is raising rates to reduce spending to cool the economy. That's the whole reason of raising the interest rates. But at the same time, you have the Biden administration unilaterally releasing, former students from student debt, which could cost upwards to $1 trillion. And then you have the so-called inflation reduction measure, which Democrats were celebrating yesterday, that puts another $700 billion into the economy. Aren't those two working in contradiction to one another?
They are absolutely working against each other. The tone-deaf remark you made a moment ago fits there as well. You've got the Fed, trying to rein in the inflation, and you got Joe Biden and Democrats in Congress fueling it even further, and then acting surprised when we have bad numbers like we did this week. And so, look, I'm not sure anything the Fed can do will tame that without crushing pain on the economy. And that's what Democrats are doing, making it harder for this economy to return to normal and for inflation to return to normal without real pain to families and small businesses. And they ought to be embarrassed. They shouldn't be celebrating. They should be embarrassed by their actions.
Are some of these policies, in fact, taking the money out of the strategic oil reserve? I mean, you're from Texas. Oil is a big deal there. Isn't this artificially driving down the price because we're not increasing production? Is this short term just to try to get us to the election, and then the American people are going to feel the real pain after the election?
Absolutely. Most of these are gimmicks to try to at least give the appearance of driving down energy prices. And the truth of the matter is, the only reason energy prices have gone down for 2 months in a row is demand has gone down. The prices are so high, people are not buying the fuel. They can't afford to do it. They're not traveling as much. So the recession type approach is already starting to lower the cost on energy. But because we're not producing more here, and you just saw, again, the federal government's taking aim at offshore drilling to try to stop or delay more drilling there. So you've got administration in the fundamentals, driving up prices in the long term, all in pursuit of this Green New Deal religion.
Dangerous for the American people, as you've pointed out. Congressman Kevin Brady, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Good to see you, sir. Thank you.